Frank Hartman had a decision to make. It was the fall of 1923, an accountant in his mid-40s, and, by all accounts, successful. Frank spent 28 years employed at the American Bridge Company in Trenton, New Jersey, where he and his wife Hannah had raised 6 children in a narrow row house along the Delaware River in Trenton's 6th Ward. Entering middle age, the longtime financial manager had the idea, and the means, to move his family out of the urban setting. In addition to a growing family, the Hartmans were also welcoming in Hannah's mother, who was in her 70s, widowed, and would need some space of her own. Frank's family had a long history in Trenton. His father, Captain William Hartman, had been Trenton's police chief and a city councilman. In the 1920s, you didn't need to go far outside of the city for quieter, peaceful living. Mercer County was surrounded by much smaller villages and farming communities, all within a reasonable commute to work for Frank. But just across the Delaware River, there were some intriguing alternatives. If you crossed the historic Lower Trenton Bridge into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just about 3 miles from the west shore of the river, there was a small community that, while not well known, stands out even today as a place that's truly one of a kind. Fallsington, Pennsylvania doesn't show up much in our history textbooks, but the history is there, and it runs pretty deep into the colonial past. Fallsington's story goes way back into the fabric of the late 1600s, as it was a Quaker settlement founded upon the arrival of William Penn in 1682. Not far away is the historical site of Penn's estate, Pennsbury Manor. Frank and his wife Hannah may have been drawn to Fallsington because of its quaint atmosphere, surrounded by farmland. Or it could have been the unique architecture of the neighborhood buildings that could have been reminiscent of her birthplace in Staffordshire, England. In any case, when a large, federal-style home became available near Fallsington's historic center, it was impossible to ignore. The roots of the estate could be traced back to the founding of Fallsington, as it was constructed by descendants of one of the original British families that arrived with William Penn in 1682. Penn granted the land to a lady named Ruth Buckman in 1683, and the Buckman family constructed the existing home in the late 1700s. A larger addition was added to the home a few years later. The Buckman family had long been influential in the region, throughout Bucks County, some family members even holding public office. The Buckman home had stayed with the family for well over a century, but had changed hands several times in the early 1900s, almost as if it were waiting for Frank Hartman to claim his prize. The home would have plenty of space for the growing Hartman family, and Sarah Ann Bratton, Frank's mother-in-law. The Buckman property had a large yard for gardening, which was important to Hannah, and a charming existence just steps from Fallsington's Meeting House Square, the historic center of the village. Nearby were 3 surviving meeting house structures completed by the Society of Friends, or Quakers, as many say. And all of it was just a relatively short drive away from the Lamberton Street neighborhood in Trenton, where the Hartmans had raised their family, making Frank's working commute reasonable. Frank was prepared. He had a new car, his 1922 Jewett 6 touring model. Frank completed the purchase of the large home, land, and its barn in the fall of 1923 from David Satterthwaite, with a plan to modernize some of the home's features before moving in. By early 1924, Frank and Hannah and their 5 youngest children, Alice, Ruth, Albert, Pat, and Olive, made the big move from Trenton, over the river, and in to Fallsington. Pat Hartman, the second youngest of Frank and Hannah's children, recalled in 1997 moving to Fallsington.
The big house is what we called it. The house had 9 fireplaces. Dad had most of them covered and installed electric heaters, which were much cleaner, but not so picturesque.
There were some differences to get used to, as well. For instance, the homes in Trenton's 6th Ward had municipal running water since the 1890s. The big White House in Fallsington had a well, requiring, at least in the beginning, numerous trips to a hand pump atop a small platform with a decorative gazebo that served as the well enclosure. One of the Hartman family traditions, or so it seems looking back, was for relatives and visitors to have their picture taken at the well, operating the hand pump, if you wished. Of the Hartman children, Alice would be married and move away just 2 years later. Pat was in high school and commuted to Trenton. Ruth would attend college and return home permanently as a local teacher. Olive, the youngest child, was in 3rd grade and would spend the rest of her grade school career in Falls Township schools, graduating in 1934. Albert had just completed high school in Trenton and was enrolled at Dickinson College. He would go on to complete his master's degree 8 years later at Yale Divinity School, and until he married in 1939, Fallsington was home. Albert Hartman was active with the Fallsington Library Board, the Methodist Church in Fallsington, and the Wesley Methodist Church in Trenton, where he would eventually serve as a pastor, and was a teacher at the Fallsington Friends School. Artistic and crafty, he also loved taking photographs and home movies. It's largely because of Albert Hartman's efforts in his photography hobby that we have an abundance of early and mid-20th century pictures, slides, and home movies from which we can tell many a story. The house, once known as the Buckman Estate, would be the center of activity for the greater Hartman family, and much of the Bratton family, including Hannah's siblings and her mother, Sarah Ann. Holiday reunions, graduations, and numerous weddings were held at the Hartmans on Main Street over the next 2 decades, given its spacious room to accommodate company and the lush surroundings of Hannah's gardens. It was a popular place for wedding receptions, with a picturesque setting behind the property, or the nearby fields surrounding the Friends Meeting House property. Hannah hosted social gatherings and committee meetings as she became president of the Fallsington chapter of the Women and Children's Temperance Union and regularly involved in community events. Frank's background in finance made him valuable as a treasurer or a trustee, from the Methodist Church to the Fallsington Library, and he was also one of the founding members of the Falls Township Fire Company, founded in 1928, which began to operate from a new but small firehouse, constructed just up the same street from where he lived. The big White House was home until Frank's sudden passing in 1945 after a heart attack. Hannah remained with her daughter Ruth, moving to a smaller home next door that the Hartman family rebuilt from the structure of the family barn. That was a bold family project, and one that's even documented with movie film, stories, and plenty of images. Hannah remained active in her community involvement, and regularly hosted family and friends throughout the year. She hosted 2 of her granddaughters regularly, Edith and Ruthie. These were Albert's children, who also formed a bond and appreciation for the small village. Hannah and Frank's descendants spread out to every part of the United States, some even to Australia, and others took their work to the Middle East. But nearly every one of them looks back to that White House as the home, where so much of the family identity comes back to, well over a half-century later. It's our hope that those who have lived in Fallsington since experience the same peace and a sense of home. It's worth remembering. The idea behind this collection is to share and imagine what moving to Fallsington could have been like over 100 years ago. An exciting idea, and a lens to look at Fallsington's history through just one family. I'd say it was a good move. There's much more to share from Albert Hartman's albums. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you look forward to seeing more of this material as much as we look forward to sharing local and family history of a century ago.